This is what you're not understanding. Hey guys, so much to catch up on. Did you know that Doc Martens are out and Samira's moving to New York? Okay, Josh Ovalle. Josh Ovalle. I love you. Please come on the podcast.
Woohoo!
Can't get comfortable in here.
I'm moving, so yeah. Come to
You
my going
literally,
away
okay.
party.
Samira was being so annoying in my
No,
car,
I
and
wasn't.
like she joined my Spotify jam, and then she gets out of the car and then she plays "Look at That Woman" by Role Model in the car when I'm like listening to a sad song, like about to cry. I literally like about to cry.
Wait, but I also played it. I didn't cue it. But didn't it make you feel better?
No.
It did. To my going away party. Wait, can I say a bunch of names? Can you bleep them out? Dom, come to my going away party. Danny, come to my going away party. Colin, come to my going away party. Noah, come to my going away party. Yep.
I was telling Samira in the car that she should text my first boyfriend and say, "Please, can you get coffee with us because I'm moving."
Brittany FaceTimed my ex-boyfriend last night,
Yeah.
and that made me sad. So,
Well, Samira's having my ex move her into New York, so we're
because
kind of like in
he's
a back and forth game right now.
because no one else can drive me to New York. I like text him asking because it was like crazy. This is how long it is.
Oh my God. What did you even say?
I said, "Hi, I hope you're doing well." Space exclamation mark, and then I sent that as one text. And then I said, "This might be awkward, and I feel bad even asking. So please don't hesitate to say no if it's too much or if it's a weird situation or you're uncomfortable. But basically, I'm moving to New York." Crying emoji, crying emoji. "I'm
No.
really excited, but I currently have no way to transport my stuff from Philly, comma. I was wondering if it's possible for you to give me a ride, question mark. I'm not bringing any furniture," and then in parentheses, "besides a tiny bookshelf," end parentheses. "So it would mainly just be boxes and suitcases. I can move in anytime April/May, and I can pay you $200 plus gas and toll money, of course. Again, if it's too much, I totally understand. Sorry for the long message, LMAO. I hope you're doing well, exclamation
You're
mark."
fucking crazy. You're fucking crazy.
And then he responded and said, "Let's do it. More than happy to help. Don't worry about paying me on top of gas and tolls.
Let's do it.
Just want to help out. My heart is happy to hear of the move." And I
Oh,
said, "Thank you
ugh.
so, so much. You have no
He like
idea how much I
actually,
appreciate
this
it.
is like pissing me off.
And I will absolutely pay you. It's the least I can do. Whatever you're comfortable with. I'm not too pressed for money."
Just wait till the Substack post comes out and then he's
I know.
like, "See, okay, guys, let me tell you this because I didn't talk about this before, but I'm
Wait,
gonna
can I
tell
just
him."
read the last part really quick? I said, "Hi, so I actually might be moving in sooner. Are you free Saturday, April 12th? Easy. That works for me. Awesome. I'll let you know if anything changes. 100%.
He needs to fucking kill himself. This is what's gonna happen, right? He's like, "Yay, I'm so happy for you. This is the best fucking news. I love you." And then he's gonna type on his little computer and we're gonna check his Substack the next day and he's gonna be like, "That fucking bitch's best that fucking bitch's best friend thinks that all I am is a fucking car and a fucking easy pass."
Stop. But I was so, that's why I was really nice in my text.
I bet he
And
hates you secretly.
I like literally said I would pay him so much money.
You guys like have to talk about me. Anyways, guys, so we're here actually to talk about acid communism and Spotify today. I know you guys are gonna love it.
I like hate us. Like if I was listening to this, I would turn it off. Like we're awful.
Oh, and I didn't
So
even get to tell my story because you were busy hogging up the spotlight. But I actually didn't announce this yet, but I did find my ex's secret Substack. Um, and I read it.
and she's saying this now because she's gonna tell him about this when they see.
I'm telling him on Thursday because I have to. So basically, I got a piece accepted to Charm School by which is run by Vivi Hayes, who we're having on next week, and I'm excited about it. She edits for like Perfectly Imperfect. It's kind of a mean piece about my relationship with Dom, and I don't even feel a lot of it anymore. I cry every day, okay? I fucking cry every day about
Maybe
him.
you should tell him that.
I'm
Maybe.
going to tell him.
Okay.
I'm gonna tell him that.
Okay. 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 Okay.
But I don't want to tell him that because he like doesn't care.
I know, but I feel like if he reads the piece, he's gonna think that you don't care.
Yeah, I know. I already wrote like okay. I actually am really nice, okay? I got him I went to Trader Joe's after because I texted him and I was like, "Hey, this thing is getting published that you're not gonna like. I'm really sorry. Can I show it to you and stuff?" And so I'm talking to him on Thursday, very nice about it over text, and was like, "Yeah, like if like I respect your writing and stuff." And I was like, "Oh my god," and then I like cried about it. Anyways,
Sorry.
so then I went to Trader Joe's and I got him a card and I wrote in it and I said,
And it's a wedding card.
it's a
It's like
wedding
a
card, like a thing you get for people when they get married. So I got a wedding card and I wrote on the inside of it, I said, "Thanks for letting me publish something mean about our relationship. You the best."
DJ Khaled.
But in reality, it's actually sweet because I also put like a little note in it, like that's like nice and like it was like something nice I wrote about our relationship. So
That's sweet.
I'm normal and I got him candy. So, anyways,
I think that's like a record for the longest that we've talked about, like exes on the podcast.
well, I feel like we don't explain things very much about it, but we do say a lot of jokes.
Austin, I was moving to New York.
Hmm.
What did he say?
He's like, "Oh."
Was that it?
I don't think he said much about it.
Stop, because he always would be like, ugh. Anyway, everyone's really proud of me, so it's like an emotional thing.
Oh my god. Okay, so anyways, guys, let's talk about this. So Spotify, I know it's crazy. It's all a lie. Basically, Hotline TNT guys came on our podcast and they recommended this book. The one who's like the most like people complain about him being like rude to people. He's the one who
Okay,
recommended it.
you like
No, but they were nice to us. We had a good time with them. I just think it's funny that people online are like, "What the hell about this guy?" Anyways, I don't know. Sorry. So he recommended this book, Mood Machine by Liz Pelly. I got it and started reading it. It's really interesting because I have never understood when people have talked about streaming. I haven't like I understand that artists are underpaid, but and that's the reason that streaming's fucked. But I've never understood like the logistics of it or like why that happens. And I didn't even like really put together like I kind of understood the baseline of like records and CDs, those sales like were more like made more revenue than streaming does. The other part of it is just like what Spotify has set up for itself that causes it to be that way. And I knew it was like a Spotify issue, but I didn't know specifically what. So I was like super interested in reading this. And basically, I'm just going to summarize it because you can read the book if you want to. Spotify started as like an advertising agency and they didn't even know what they were going to sell. And they marketed themselves like they were music lovers and made it seem like this thing that was appealing to people who liked music. And it was this like really great thing for artists. They would just market themselves based on whoever they were trying to appeal to. So they were also like doing this with like the major labels and the major labels all like have 70% of the stock that's in Spotify and basically everything is set up for the majors to have insane streaming numbers because they have editorial playlists and the editorial playlists started off as editorial playlists that were actually just people's music and there were spots on there to like illuminate different artists and stuff like that, but the playlists became this thing where they were like, wait, we're not making enough money because streaming just doesn't make enough money. So we need to find a way to fix this so that our revenue is enough for us to even be, well, I think to be making like a larger profit off the company. They did this. I don't know if it was, I don't think it was that they like weren't making enough money or maybe they just weren't making enough money. They supply like different playlists with something called perfect fit content. And the perfect fit content is stuff that they commission from artists through these like fake labels that they've set up, or like write something like really easy that like pass easily in a playlist. But like people who actually understand music like can easily tell these apart because they're like very obviously written for that purpose. But yeah, so these artists, there's like certain labels. One of them is Epidemic Sounds, which is like I've seen their playlists before.
Mhm.
Um and there's like a bunch of other ones, but a lot of the artists who are working for those labels don't even actually know that that's what's happening. They're just like basically being paid a better amount. Like it's like the same thing as being paid for a gig that's like a wedding gig or something. Like it's like that sort of job for a musician. And they are generating these songs that Spotify uses and don't retain the rights to the song. So they get royalties from the song and they get paid to make the song. But because it's like this thing they're being employed to do, Spotify retains the rights. And something else that I don't really know how to explain logistically, but basically Spotify makes more money off it and has to pay the artist less than a normal song you that like is made by an actual artist. So it's beneficial to them to put it in their playlist and boost those in their playlist because they have control over like literally everything. Like they're basically in control of like what does well on their app, which is like fucked because they're like it's not like genuine.
Wait, I'm like a little confused though. But I think I
Okay.
also just don't like I think I need to read the book because I also just don't know anything about how it works. I feel like or how like why it's very detrimental to artists other than just hearing artists talk about it. But the thing that I'm confused about is wouldn't it be is it not beneficial to smaller artists who like are because Spotify just makes it easy for anyone to upload music and then your music can get discovered on a playlist.
Yeah, but the thing is that they're not really giving like yeah, there's like those people who get lucky and they get put on a playlist like that.
An aspect of this that I forgot to mention is that an artist can pay for their song to get promoted by Spotify by giving them a certain amount of money that would be made from the streaming. And in turn, less money is made off the song, which appeals to an independent artist and inevitably creates this play to pay environment for a song to be successful. An artist can sacrifice some of their pay from it.
But the thing is that a lot of the playlists that are editorial playlists that Spotify made and aren't personal user playlists are like purposefully being stocked with like stock music, which is what I just described, like
Yeah.
the perfect fit content.
And another thing with this specific type of stock content that isn't really stock content, but it kind of is, because they pass it off and they're like, no, this is real art, but it's not really. It's beginning to be created by machine learning as well, and not even commissioned artists, since it's less money for that.
So,
Oh,
and those
okay.
are taking away spots from small artists. And like a
Okay.
lot of them are also marginalized artists because some of the most popular ones are like chill playlists, which would normally be
Mhm.
supplied with like jazz and other types of genres. And
Yeah.
those are a lot of the time people of color and like just like marginalized group. They also like took credit for like coining the term hyper pop when they didn't. Like they made like
Like
hyper pop
Spotify did?
seem like something they put together into a playlist and like this is like a thing when it's not. And a lot of those playlists are also just stocked with white boys. Hyperpop genre is so full of like trans people and
Yeah.
like just generally like marginalized people. It's like really messed up.
Or people should read the book because I feel like everyone is kind of aware of the fact that oh, Spotify is detrimental to
Mhm.
artists, but I feel like no one really knows why.
Yeah,
Or
no,
at least
that's what
that's what I
I
thought.
had as well, where I didn't understand like why. And like a lot of it is just the fact that instead of it being like an equal chance for everyone, the whole thing is like oh, and a lot of the time when they are letting those smaller artists through like the gates to a playlist, that artist like had to like be their own like marketer on like TikTok
Yeah.
or
I also did want to add this because I found after we recorded this episode, and it feels very important to the topic, that there's another man who wrote a book on the topic of Spotify and streaming that my friend Wes recommended to me, called You Have Not Heard Your Favorite Song by Glenn McDonald. He has a blog where he talked about Liz Pelly's book versus his, and I'm going to read the post really quickly because it's really interesting, and he used to work at Spotify. As an editor at a large publisher who liked my proposal for a book but was not going to publish it, very reasonably explained to me, commercial publishers are in the business of publishing books that people already know they want to read. In books about music, as other editors told me less apologetically, this mostly means biography of popular musicians, but Glamour does generously leave a little shelf space for fear, and so the book that a bigger publisher than mine thinks people already want to read is Liz Pelly's Moon Machine, The Rise of Spotify and the Cost of the Perfect Playlist. If you are the people they have in mind who already wanted to read soberly researched explanations of some of the ways in which a culture-themed capitalist corporation has pursued capitalism with a disregard for culture, written in a tone of muted resignation, here's your mood. He basically goes on to talk about Spotify and how he got laid off there, and that a lot of people there did care about music a lot, especially the employees, and that he spent a lot of time working there, and Spotify decisively finally voted against this by laying him off, and devoting considerable remaining resources to laboriously shutting down everything he worked on, and he was hardly the only person there who believed in music and wanted there to be a music company that put music above company. But then he goes on to say, it was never very likely to, of course. As Liz begrudgingly notes in her introduction, she set out to write an anti-Spotify book, only to realize the problem wasn't just Spotify so much as power. Spotify entered a music business largely controlled by a few record companies at a point in history when the other confounding factors in the industry were already technology. Spotify did eventually come up with a few minorly novel forms of moral transgression, but they were never really in a position to explode the existing power structures, even if we could pretend they wanted to. He says, there are 3 specific things I fought against throughout my time at Spotify, and although my layoff was officially just part of a large impersonal reduction in headcount, it's hard to imagine that there wasn't some connection. Moon Machine describes 2 of these in depressing detail. The secret preferential treatment of particular low royalty background music, and the not secret marketing program to pressure artists to voluntarily accept lower royalty rates for the prospect of undisclosed algorithmic promotion. Liz quotes multiple internal Spotify Slack messages about both of these programs. He says that he thinks he gets quoted about the discovery mode. And he said that in the quote, he went on to explain how to fix the economics of this by making Spotify's benefit conditional on artist benefit, and how to fix the morality of it by actually giving artists interesting agency instead of just an opportunity for submission. But Liz doesn't quote that part. I thought that this was really interesting because I feel like he exactly explained what was wrong with the book. Not that the information in it wasn't important and real and true, and I feel like really eye-opening for a lot of people. And the sad truth is that I feel like that's the sort of book that's going to get published for general public to read. But she never really spent time trying to understand a real solution, which I've realized now that I've finished the book. And I think that as we continue the conversation in the episode, it's also where we get stuck, because she does present a lot of facts without a clear solution, and we're like trying to work through it, and it doesn't really, like, we don't even really know where to go, which is okay because there isn't always a good solution. But Glenn's perspective is interesting because later he also mentions that it seems like the only thing that they both commonly spoke about was just that a solution would be maybe universal basic income. And yeah, I don't know. I think that's really interesting because we go on to talk about capitalism in this episode and how this is just a smaller issue within the issue of capitalism. And yeah, that this structure is what translates to a lot of different avenues.
So just like the majors are all like boosted on playlists because it's beneficial for Spotify. And like, so the fact that like all these things that are beneficial for Spotify are affecting whether or not an artist is like gets a spot on a playlist. And also obviously like an artist getting a spot on the playlist isn't the only part of Spotify. I'm also not fully done the book.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting because it was making me think a lot about major labels, and I literally forgot until I was reading it, and I was telling you about this before, that I had that internship at Warner Music, and the reason that they hired me was because I like said I had a fan account. And I feel like that's like just insane that like everything is just made to imitate something else that's genuine. And
Yeah.
that's like also the case with just like the majors, like I don't know. It like Spotify is like I feel like only just one example of someone doing that, and like with like in terms of like music and the majors, they also do that with like social media, and they get the same thing. Like they get all this like free like advertising money on like
Yeah.
TikTok and stuff, which I like learned when I was these big labels also just like have fake fan accounts. Like they literally have fake fan
Yeah.
accounts. They make fake edits. A lot of the things that we see online, and I know this isn't really a new idea, but a lot of the like marketing tactics that artists use are like fabricated by creative directors. Not that it makes it like less real, but it does in a way because it's like, oh, you think this thing naturally happened because people on the internet liked it. No, it's actually because a creative director came up with the idea, like the girl in red, like, do you listen to Girl in Red joke on TikTok
Yeah.
was made by a creative director. Like someone told me that like the like Lov's album, his head is like shaved and his hair is
Hmm.
dyed green, was also a choice by a creative director. Again, that's like not really a new idea, but it's everything is just like made for people to get tricked.
Yeah. I think it's like the fact that we all grew up in this generation of kids and teenagers who had fan accounts and who were growing up with social media and learning how to be an influencer before influencing was a thing. And
Mm,
then we got to a point where it actually became a career and it became something you could make money off of, and influencers became this huge market. And everyone that made fan accounts when they were younger, before it was ever a thing, they're all grown up now and they're looking for jobs. And so they get into industries or they get internships or jobs where they use those skills. And then that's kind of just like how the cycle continues. And then it's like tricking other people,
mm.
the new generation.
Yeah. And I think the overall issue with Spotify is that it became, instead of they're like, "No, actually we're here to help you." And I know that that also just is the baseline thing of a lot of big corporations. It's like, "Well, how are we going to sell this to someone? We're going to make them think that it's something they
Yeah.
want and need." But I think it feels different because we watched it come up on social media and it felt like something that wouldn't like happen maybe, but not even wouldn't happen, but just that like social media was a safe place where like we're just actually making things that are creative and art reaches people here, and this is like this like promised land almost. But I think the thing with Spotify is like she Liz Pelly also wrote about how they were basically trying to target, once they got people to subscribe, like targeting people who didn't want to make active choices, because there's a lot of people who don't actively listen and there's a lot of people who do, but there's like probably like I don't know, like a huge percentage of the app are not active listeners and they just want to click on something. So then like that's how they were able to then like stock playlists with whatever and like create almost this like fake universe that isn't
Yeah.
even like you think it's real, but it's just like a fake universe.
Yeah. No, Spotify is like a crazy, because I remember like when it became a thing. And because before Spotify, there wasn't a way to listen to music like that. Like you had to buy a song on Apple Music or whatever, or you had to listen to like Pandora or something and like shuffle through songs and just like hope that the song you wanted to hear would come on.
Yeah. Same
And
with like the radio. Like the radio was such a
yeah,
thing when you were younger and you were in the car and you were like just like you had no control over it.
yeah. I like am wondering what a solution for it would be, because I feel like we're at a point now where we've like all experienced streaming music and literally being able to listen to any song you want
Yeah, that
at
can't
any
ever go
moment. It can't
away.
go away. And if Spotify is not gonna like fix it and pay artists more, then like is that the only solution? Like for them to pay artists more and just fix their structure?
I don't think that paying the artist more, because they're literally like it's like very obvious just reading the book. Like there's no really morals to what they're doing.
And the whole playing field is unequal. At some point, we try to figure out if Spotify is simply not making enough money because streaming isn't sustainable. But I'm pretty positive, because I went back to the book after this conversation and checked, that it's just uneven because of the deals they've made with major labels. And they could be playing more and generally leveling the playing field, which they claim to do, but they aren't actually doing. And again, that goes back to the other voiceover that I inserted about like just the issues that Glenn McDonald brought up, that the solution would be to do these certain things to make it so that Spotify's benefit is dependent on artist benefit.
Yeah. No, I
And
know.
like I don't think it's even like yeah, paying artists more would help, but I think it's also just like the entire app is set up to be pretty unfair and like create it's almost like with like the same like the equivalent of like class consciousness. Like you're kind of having to like buy into this thing. And
Yeah.
like if you can't buy into the thing, you're not gonna succeed at it a lot of the time. I don't know. Obviously that's not true because there's a lot of artists that are able to become successful. But I was thinking about it as you were talking and just like the idea of like the radio and it being a thing. Like I think a big like factor I think a big factor of Spotify being what it is because they were the first to really do the social aspect of it, of seeing what your friends are listening to. And I think that
Yeah.
that's like a super main part of it. I think like that is something that we need. And I think just like having everything available, like as much music as possible available, I think those two things are the reason that Spotify is still, while doing all these like other shitty things, like it's still like well, I'm not getting off Spotify. Like I'm saying all this, but like I can't get off there. All my friends are on there and all the music's on there. I think that I don't know, people I feel like laugh whenever I say this because it's like that seems unrealistic. I think a good guy just has to come along and basically have good intentions and not change that and like somehow like assert some sort of safety net. Like I don't know if that would mean regulation or like some sort like I don't know. Like but I
Yeah.
think like to you have to like remake the platform for that to happen. And people like I think when you say that's like so hard to happen and that's like you're crazy. But I feel like it just takes enough people normalizing that train of thought for it to be seen as rational so that then when someone does do it and that does come along, or maybe one of us will do it, like I think the issue is that people with money just do things to keep generating money and it becomes a cycle. And it seems impossible that like someone could come along and fix it. But I think like I don't know. It also seems impossible that some guy who's actually smart and isn't gonna like fuck everyone will come along eventually and have the right idea. I don't know. Everything moves really quickly.
Yeah. Does she talk about in the book like how like I know you said they were an advertising agency and then they like that's and they just were like looking for something to sell. But the thing that I'm curious about and the thing that I never really understood is how they were able to like just make all of this music available and make it free.
It was so they were the first kind of or not the first, but it was like at a time where pirating was the
Mhm.
thing that's
Yeah.
like was the
Yeah.
norm. And then all these other platforms came along. So they kind of sold it as a way to like stop piracy and to make like help artists and be like we're not going to let people pirate your music, they're going to have to pay for it. The like goal was to get people on a script subscription and like
Yeah,
sell
no.
ads by
Yeah.
like
But
yeah.
now it's like you pay like X amount per month and you can listen to however much music you want. But I'm saying like is that possible? Like if a new platform were to come along, like it couldn't follow the exact same model, could it? Because then it would still not be making enough money to pay artists. Or is Spotify has enough money, but they're like using it for up, like they are not giving it to artists. Is that the issue?
Well, that's the thing, that's why streaming
It's just
is
bad,
like
right?
it's just fucked
Yeah.
because it is like you're just not making enough money off
Yeah.
streaming.
So I
But
think
I do think it's like also the the place that the major labels have in it.
yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure that it wouldn't solve everything for the majors to be treated like normally, but that just isn't going to happen, unless like I don't know. I mean, Bandcamp is a good model that worked for people, but it just got sold to
Yeah. Wouldn't you have to create a new platform that isn't streaming?
also Bandcamp got sold to Epic Games, so that was the thing.
Whoa, that's
But
crazy.
so that's like gonna fuck the platform. I don't well, Bandcamp is a streaming platform, but it isn't, yeah, it's not like you have everything available. I'm not sure. It's like just like the spread of how
Yeah.
people get paid. But obviously there's also like a level of like if you're an independent artist and like no one's streaming your music, like obviously you're not going to get paid.
We interviewed, but they were saying how they don't think Spotify is a sustainable model. Maybe it was Homeshake. That it's just
I
not
think it was Hotline
sustainable.
Kid too.
That said it's not sustainable. I think that is an interesting thing. Like, I don't know. I'm curious to see if one day Spotify will collapse because it hasn't been around for that long. Like,
Yeah, it just feels like it to us because
yeah.
like we grew up on it.
So I'm curious if it'll collapse and it'll just be like a thing of the past.
I was thinking about like it was just making me remember a lot of things about um working at Warner and like being an intern, and I like forgot that I remember getting that email about I misread the first email I got where I thought that they like were like you got an interview, but I actually didn't even get an interview, and it was just them saying like thank you for your application. And I remember misreading that as thinking that I got accepted like for an interview, and then I told people and I looked at it and I was like, "Oh, I messed up." And then a few days later I got an acceptance like for an interview. Isn't
That's
that so
crazy.
weird?
That is weird.
At the time, I feel like I just was like so excited because I was like, this is like the big music industry. And this is where you have to go if you want to make it. And tried like doing anything that I could do while I was there, like as an intern. And I remember I like talked to the girl who did like the Spotify like playlist for them. And she had me like design covers for some of the playlists. And I don't remember if she ever actually used them, but I was just thinking about how like because I was doing it for like indie playlists, and it's like the fact that you had a teenage girl designing these playlists to make them look like they were made by a human is really fucked up because it's like these aren't like they weren't, they were like planted songs that like, you know,
Yeah.
it's just like weird how like you can't really trust anything that's being sold to you ever anymore.
Yeah.
So acid communism.
Yeah.
Just what I thought was interesting about it and why I wanted to talk about was because I was like fascinated finding this like political thing online that had something to do with spirituality to me. I
Yeah.
was like, this is
Yeah.
crazy that this thing has to do with spirituality and that's like where we're headed. But
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Basically, I watched this video online about it by One Dime, and he was basically like describing acid communism and explaining it. And essentially, what it is it's like a political movement, social movement, political school of thought that essentially is based on the idea that,
It's by Mark Fisher. He wrote a
yeah,
like zine about it.
it's based on the idea that the big problem with the left, like right now, and how it has been, is that people on the left rely solely on rational appeals and fact-based arguments. And so they think, oh, because this proposed solution is objectively the solution that's the most beneficial to people, then this idea will win support. But that obviously hasn't been working. And the reason for that is because it doesn't consider the social and psychological conditions of humans. And so essentially, a political movement needs some sort of psychological and spiritual appeal to it in order for it to become a mass movement. And um yeah, essentially, and there's a couple of things that he talked about in the video that I wanted to talk about that I thought were really interesting. The first one was the idea of like spreading leftist ideas, and how we need alternative ways to spread those ideas, and how direct action isn't enough in the world that we live in today because the left simply is not big enough. And he said that like even if all the factions of the socialist left in America united, it would still be like less than the population of New York City, which is crazy to think about because I feel like we forget that sometimes the majority of America is just like middle America. Yeah, and I was also listening, I think that he talked about this in the podcast that because he interviewed Joshua Citarella and they talked about this, but they were also saying how a lot of the reason for why, like talking like specifically about like trans rights issues, because that was a topic that they talked about in the podcast. It's not that people don't support it or that people like don't care about it. It's more so that people in like middle America or whatever see they don't know any trans people in real life, right? So then they like see the Democrats or the left or whatever, like making what what appears to be like such a big deal over this issue that they don't even have any personal connection to. So they're like, okay, but what about these issues that I'm dealing with that you're not focusing on? And so that's like a big reason why it's like, and we like saw that even with the election where people were taking an exit poll and like what issues mattered the most to them. So basically, all that to say is that the left is really small. And so we need like new ways to spread leftist ideas. And there was this book that he talked about, Can the Left Learn to Meme by Mike Watson, which basically just like talks about that idea of spreading leftist ideas. And yeah, so going back to like the psychological or like the spiritual appeal to it, he also used Jordan Peterson as an example, which I thought was really interesting because he was saying how whether like a political ideology being sold is based on the facts matters, but it doesn't like it, but the marketing of that idea also matters a lot. And like that's why when you think about someone like Jordan Peterson, who is a very popular academic and like a well-known academic, but majority of what he says is false, but that doesn't matter because it's like how he presents it, and that's why he's so popular. Classic communism, Mark Fisher like coined it after, and it was based on like the 1960s counterculture. Then the 1960s
You're like my explain video right now.
Thanks for that. So the 1960s counterculture movement comes along, and a lot of people blamed the 1960s for attributing to the fall of the left. And because a lot of the people in the 1960s counterculture movement then switched to like neoliberalism because that was kind of what filled that void. And he does talk about how like if you have a social movement that doesn't have any concrete political goals, like that's going to fail. Like the hippie movement, like counterculture, like that's why that failed. But on the flip side, if you have a very hardline political socialist movement, but you don't have any spiritual or psychological appeal, then that's not going to succeed either. And so Mark Fisher said that although there were a lot of problems with the 1960s counterculture movement, there's a lot to learn from it as well. And that basically he also has this idea of capitalist realism. Do you know about this? Sorry.
That's me killing myself and punching.
No.
Punching a lot.
But capitalist realism, think there's no alternative to capitalism and that capitalism is like the only solution. But that's why he looked at the 1960s and counterculture to be like, no, but there is another solution because those movements in the 1960s were gaining a lot of traction, like the student protests, the communes, the Paris 1968 uprisings, like they were all gaining a lot of traction. But then ultimately they were repressed or co-opted because of like state violence, like the war on drugs, or through commodification, like how the hippies kind of became like an aesthetic and it was like a fashion thing. So he explores the idea of like, okay, but what if those movements had won? And I think that had won. Like, what if
had
those,
won,
yeah,
had
yeah.
won.
Like, what if those movements had like they weren't destroyed and they like kept on going and won? And I think the idea of acid communism is really funny because just like the wording of it and like the
that's what I wanted to talk about too. Yeah.
Like I think the connotation of that is really, really interesting. And he also like talked about it and was saying that like his point isn't that, oh, you just take acid and then that leads to like communism or like acid, you know, but it was more so the fact that this idea of like altering consciousness can be part of larger social change. And the fact that a lot of people do have
like the psychedelic movement did do that.
Yeah, like a lot of people have personal experiences with psychedelics where they feel humbled or they feel awakened or they feel like enlightened or their like minds are open or they gain a new self-awareness. And then with like all the research that was being done in the 1960s, but then how that was like shut down because of Nixon and because of the war on drugs and everything. And so he was basically saying like, okay, there's this notion that psychedelics can break down the logic that makes us stuck in this way of capitalist thinking, and that makes us focus on work, focus on productivity. They break down ego, hierarchy, and make us more focused on creativity, community, nature, and yeah.
Such a good explanation, by the way. Like,
Thanks,
thank
honey.
you for explaining it. Ask Samira to read this and like look into it because I was looking into it and I know I'm late to the party, the Mark Fisher party. I know everyone's in the party, guys, but I know I'm late to the party. But I mean, I've known who he is. I just never like read Acid Communism. Like my ex's friend recommended it to me, and Wes recommended it to me. Thank you, Wes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he
I
he
think
gives me
that
really good recommendations. He's a smart guy.
I like Wes. I've always
Yeah.
liked Wes.
He's very sweet, he's very smart. He recommended reading that because I brought up capitalist realism and Mark Fisher and Josh Citarella. And I've known like that stuff, but haven't known like I didn't know about acid communism. And I thought it was like very like mind-boggling because to me, such a key part of like what I feel like has been my connection with a lot of people in the city. I'll meet someone and I'm like, "Have you done acid?" And then they're like, "Yes." And I'm like, "That makes sense. I can tell." And it's like
Yeah.
just interesting because obviously like acid isn't the solution for everyone. Psychedelics aren't the solution for everyone. But it is just interesting that like aspect of that feels like it's like resonates in the political idea in like a non-annoying way. Like to me after doing it I was like, "Oh." And it like felt like it kind of like shed this whole oh no, it just like opened up the whole like, oh, there's like just all these words and confines on things, but like it doesn't actually have to be that way. And obviously it's much easier said than done, but I don't know. It always just felt like this like secret. And it's like if you had like experienced it, it was like this secret. And I know that that's like an annoying thing to say, but I just felt like I had this thing about it. I don't know. I wish we could let go of the fact that it's like an annoying thing because I know it like obviously like there's like only so much of it that you can like take. You know, like
Yeah.
there's only like you can like take so much from that and it's just the idea of like collective consciousness and like unworking like thought patterns and stuff. And obviously that can be done without psychedelics, but it's just like an interesting thing because like this really intelligent political writer tied psychedelic awakening to defeating capitalism and I feel like I just like 100% agree and like I felt that in my bones forever that our world would change if we just increase our awareness towards each other. And I like that psychedelics like represent that. About like the way that I perceive the world as I was kind of researching it and only in that moment I was realizing I not everyone has had an experience and not even like a psychedelic one, but like just like not everyone has had an experience that like is like so life-changing and spiritual that can obviously come in a lot of avenues, but just seeing that like things can be very different.
I was having a tough time explaining this in the moment, but I was thinking specifically about how this really deep psychedelic moment I had the first time I did acid, where I was sitting outside and there was just a deep understanding for everything and the outside. It was beautiful and all the nature was alive. And to physically like see that with your own eyes is an interesting thing to think about. And especially because it's in an extremely intense way through a substance. And this happens in smaller ways, just in life, of course. Um, but I do think it had changed my ability to approach things with empathy and to even know that a state like that exists. Um, I think is really beneficial. And I think for more reasons than just being able to have more empathy for people, it's really evident that the positive sort of benefits of psychedelic are super representative of something life-changing. And obviously, I know that we're going super deep into psychedelics and talking specifically about that because of the connotation of the word, but obviously that's not actually what's representative of the movement. It's just the rise in consciousness in general and people accepting each other. And I just think that that would change everything, but that is a crazy thing to tackle. But I was just thinking about this and how some people haven't seen with their own eyes something like what I am describing and doing a bad job at describing because you can't really put that sort of experience into words. But it just made so much sense to me in my head after having that thought why people get so caught up in their own heads or struggles or anything. Because it almost feels like you're seeing this glimpse into what it feels like to die, or the piece of just everyone is your equal, and all these systems that are in place are just like shedded from your mind in a way. Like, you know that these things were just built and created, and I think that's something you can know in a way, but it's like gives you this deeper understanding of that. And yeah, essentially I just think it's interesting to explore what the world would be like if everyone did have an experience like that.
Getting too psychedelic-y because I know that I feel like it's so hard to talk about without
No,
like
I know. But
that.
that also is the like connotation that it's acquired. And I feel like if like there was research done on it, and if the research wasn't shut down in the 60s when it like started and stuff, then how different would it be now?
And it's
Like
like, why were they like trying to like
no, exactly.
repress
Like
that
they
research?
recognized, they like
That
definitely
it would have done
recognized,
something.
yeah, that there was like a lot of like there was like this insane potential of psychedelics to make people be like, oh, maybe we shouldn't be like working every single day for 14 hours a day or whatever. Like
Hmm.
apparently Nixon labeled Timothy Leary the most dangerous man in America.
That's crazy. I didn't like, I mean, it makes a lot of sense just like based on like what was going on at that time. But
Yeah.
it is like very interesting. I think just in the sense of what I was saying, like I was just thinking about the way I view the world, and I realized how much just having this like really peaceful, like pretty, like psychedelic experience where I just felt very one with everything did really change my perception of the world. And not that I wasn't
Yeah.
probably already like that beforehand, and I was like inclined to having that experience because I already felt kind of inclined to like, oh, the energies of the world and all that
Yeah.
stuff.
But I
But
think everyone
yeah,
can be inclined. Like I think everyone is inclined to just have empathy, you know?
yeah.
So then I think like doing psychedelics, I think for some people probably just bring them more aware to that. And I also like what you were saying about how like, oh, we just have names for all of these things. Like that was another point he brought up in the video was how like, and that I'm sure Mark Fisher talked about was that like how the left is so divided right now just because of like this like ego attachment that we have to our political identities.
Hmm.
And like there's all different kinds of people on the left, but like at the end of the day, we all ultimately want the same thing, or like we want like in general the same thing. And so that like doing psychedelics and like breaking down this ego and breaking down this identity of like, okay, if I attack or if I like say something, criticize your political ideology, that isn't a personal attack on you. And I feel like a lot of the times that's how it's perceived. And I feel like we see that a lot with just like our peers of like,
Hmm.
oh, like saying something to someone and then they isolate you or exile you because they think it's like, because it's their ego, like their ego's attached to it. And they're like, oh, this is the way I think this has to be right.
Hmm.
And that happens a lot on the left and the right. But like,
Hmm.
yeah,
It even just like plays into cancel culture, like like the and
yeah.
like so much of the online space as well. That's why I don't know, because like in terms of online, like how do you think that translates?
I feel like people just like getting into arguments over things that like
Yeah,
don't like because he was talking about how it's
just like
like
the reactionary internet,
yeah,
basically.
because he was talking about how there's like oh all these like fights and like while some of the fights are valid, a lot of them are like meaningless between like Marxist Leninists, like all the different like factions of the left, and it's like okay, but at the end of the day, like what are we even fighting about? Like we're also like left is also too small to have that much like
Like
infighting.
division. Yeah.
Yeah, division. But I was also gonna say too, that yeah, so like the other thing that was really interesting, I don't know if like you saw this, but how people now are like using psychedelics in a way to like fuel capitalism and to fuel work, like talking about like specifically in like Silicon Valley, like using like microdosing in order to like increase productivity. And like how now it's like we're at a kind of a turning point where we're seeing like the exact opposite like end of that.
That is so scary.
Yeah, and I thought that was really scary because we're seeing definitely seeing like a resurgence of psychedelics.
Like fight it's like they're fighting with the same thing that you know is like this really powerful thing that can really like
Yeah,
change the way people see the world, and they're using it to like fuck
to make
with
them like more
people,
productive under capitalism,
like turn them
essentially.
into slaves.
Yeah, yeah,
It's scary.
which yeah, that like really freaked me out. But
Mhm. I thought something I wanted to read this because I also wrote this down and it's kind of related. I was reading Tao Lin's, I think that's how you say their name, um, spiritual journey, and they wrote about DMT trips and stuff like that, and how basically wrote about how every time that they tripped and stuff, and how they didn't grow up religious or spiritual or anything, but just like a general overall spirituality was really helpful for them, and
mhm,
doing psychedelics. And I wanted to read it because it does like kind of I feel like give a way better description to what I was trying to describe,
mhm,
in terms of just like I was doing a really bad job, I think, at explaining like what I meant by like how I feel like it affected my perception. They basically like wrote down their trips and they were trying to like remember them. Um but then their like memory like of it they couldn't remember, so then when it would happen again it would feel even more surprising, like encountering a scent after spending months trying to draw it. They said, I tried to give myself up in humility to relax into passivity, but I couldn't because I was involuntarily engaged in an intimidating interaction with a disquieting somethingness. Before smoking, I told myself to just observe and explore and mentally take notes, but once I was there, this seemed impossible, mainly because my life, which I could barely remember, seemed so insignificant that doing anything that for it felt absurd, like wanting to bring back information from a rainforest or use in a game of Tetris, which I thought is so interesting and such a like great way to describe how like I feel like that's where I've gone when I've done psychedelics. So then like everything else by association feels like okay, like we can like like this is like not what we all like
Yeah.
make it out to be.
Yeah.
Like this is not that big and like we can just like solve it. Many cultures viewed the universe as a lie, I knew. Compared to where I'd been, the universe seemed limited and somehow artificial. Despite its complexity, it felt suspiciously simple, like an extremely advanced multiplayer online role playing
Mhm.
game, a world which was ontologically dependent on wouldn't exist without its container world, the spirit world. Similar to how Moby Dick and World of Warcraft wouldn't exist if the universe didn't exist. I just like all of this because it's like very like whenever I feel like I'm freaking out, I read this stuff and it makes me feel better. Also, okay, they get into like near death experiences in this, which I think is so interesting because like I got really into the OA and I made everyone else get really into the OA, which is a show about near death experiences. And it's just weird how much media comes back to this and how spirituality comes back to this and how like everything circulates around dying and death. And like I think if that also were more of a key thing that we could feel we could understand better, we'd be less obsessed with money
Yeah,
and like worldly
definitely.
belongings and things like that and like just like more like tame and normal.
I say that I think like a really big issue is that there just isn't enough research about it, especially like psychedelic research, because like I'm also just curious, like for some people, like does doing psychedelics increase like a need to work or increase like even like talking about microdosing and like how that can increase productivity? Like I just because I think with anything that is that powerful, it can be used for good and for bad.
Yeah.
And so I feel like the fact that there just isn't research done and like it's also really scary to think about, okay, but the people that are conducting that research also need to be doing it in an ethical way and like need
Mhm.
to be doing it for genuine purposes and not just for like increasing the workforce.
Yeah, that's what's scary is I feel like in the wrong hands it could be just like Spotify.
Yeah.
Like
And it
people
all
like they
connects.
it all connects. Spotify is just like a smaller level of like the greater thing we're talking about, which I think is
Yeah.
interesting.
Can
And
you make
like
the title Acid is like Spotify? Sorry.
they also wrote let me just read the rest of this because it's
Yeah.
sweet. This is talking about near-death experiences now. The light being doesn't judge. When he came across times when I had been selfish, his attitude was only that I had been learning from them too, said a person in Life After Life. Judgment comes only from yourself. The light being admits an all-encompassing, unconditional love that is unimaginable, indescribable. You feel the happiest you've ever felt while in the light of the being who seems to as the important of two things in life, loving others and acquiring knowledge. Materialists and atheists NDEers, which stands for near death experience, tend to relinquish their beliefs, while spiritual NDEers adjust theirs, with many abandoning what Moody, which is the person who wrote the novel about near death experiences, called the reward punishment model of the afterlife. Grayson wrote, many experiencers describe adopting a form of non denominational spirituality since they're NDs in which all religious traditions are valued, but no one religion is given precedence. NDs, I now understood, were not an extension of religion. And also they like the reason they get into NDs, sorry, I didn't explain this, is because they were like, this is what psychedelics is like.
Mhm.
Psychedelics is like are like dying. It's the removal of the
That's
ego.
so interesting.
Um, but yeah, NDEs I now understood were not an extension of religion, stories created to support or rationalize one's beliefs. Instead, they appeared to predate religion and may have been one of the main inspirations, along with other mystical experiences induced through drugs, trance, fasting, and other methods.
I also think it's interesting how and I love Zoloft. I love it. I love SSRIs. I think that no, this is actually like something that I've wanted to talk about too because I think that they're so helpful, and I think that you definitely need them. And like thinking back to when I was 16 and I got on SSRIs, like if I didn't, I would not be alive. Like I like needed to be on them. But I think that the fact that they like affect tripping and that psychedelics and SSRIs don't work together is really interesting. And
Hmm.
the fact that Molly, you can't do Molly when you're on SSRIs, the fact that you can't eat grapefruit apparently, which I just learned, which is also crazy because like how do you not know this? Like how do people not tell you this when you start taking medicine that like, oh, I think just the normalization of SSRIs is really insane. And I know that Elizabeth Wurtzel talks about this a lot in Prozac Nation, like in the epilogue of
Elizabeth,
it.
my girl.
In like the epilogue, because she like published that because it's really interesting because she wrote that when Prozac was first like becoming a thing, like when it was
Mm.
first approved by the FDA. And so she was like one of the first people to like be on Prozac, which is really interesting. And then she like wrote an epilogue later being like everyone is on Prozac now. And it's like almost like a joke or like a meme at this point. And like it's like, okay, but why are all these people on? And that was also the thing that Mark Fisher talked about too, was how mental health isn't a personal problem, it's a political problem. And like the reason so many people are depressed and anxious is because of the system that we're in. And I think that that definitely is also part of it. Like, I do think that there are definitely some people who are just like, I don't know, who like have mental illness and it's like separate from that, but then also like the system plays a part in it. I don't know. But yeah, I just think SSRIs are really interesting. And I think that,
I do think it's crazy that you can't do them while you're on psychedelics. Like, what does that mean about SSRIs? Even though they're like
yeah,
definitely necessary and helpful for people, like,
yeah.
but also like I think a lot of people are on them who don't need them
No,
because they
yeah,
just are overly prescribed, and also
yes.
they're like, oh, you have a chemical imbalance. There's literally no such thing as a
Yeah,
chemical imbalance, and the fact that like I didn't know that until like this year because I read a book about it,
yeah.
and
No, they're
like
very overprescribed.
I don't know, it's just insane because I do think that maybe if we had the right knowledge of psychedelics, I wonder if they were used properly with like a therapist, if they could help you avoid putting random stuff in your body. Like, and I don't think that this is like the a good thing for everyone because obviously it's just like something that has been okay for me to do. But I just think that like even like birth control, I'm like, I don't want to go near anything that I have to put in my body like
Yeah,
consistently, and that's gonna like change the way that like my body
like
functions and like
you mess
forms
up your
emotions.
hormones.
Yeah,
Well,
because
that's,
hormones are literally what cause your emotions, and like
yeah,
that's like changing your entire like life and personality and like being.
yeah. There's this one book, I forget what it was called, but it was like, it was pretty popular. It's like very popular right now, and it's gotten like a lot of criticism, but also makes some valid points. A lot of people are like criticizing it for like fear mongering about birth control, but it basically is just talking about the pill and like, which
Wait, what
also,
book?
I'll look it up. It's on my to read list. But basically, birth control is such a fascinating thing too, because when the pill first came out, like it was revolutionary, and the fact that like you could just have sex and enjoy sex without worrying about getting pregnant, without worrying about like having a family, about being financially stable, all this stuff, like it was true, like it was insane. But the fact that like it really like it completely it like changes your hormones, which is like crazy. And I feel like birth control, like the pill, is also like something that's like prescribed so easily without people really even knowing what it's doing. It's called This Is
Mm-hmm.
Your Brain on Birth Control,
Ooh,
um,
wait.
by
There's also.
Sarah E. Hill. And it says that,
Hi.
and like, and also birth control, I think it's important to remember too, is like a newer thing. And so it is like, okay, we're just now starting to understand a lot of the stuff that birth control does. Yeah, and it basically just talks about it. But yeah, I think people were criticizing the tone of the book and stuff. But I think the bottom line is that there needs to be more research done on the topics that are newer and topics that
These
are,
things will help us.
yes, like birth control and
You know what's
psychedelics.
crazy though? You know what's crazy? Also, if you want a good book to read about fertility and learning about all that stuff, Taking Charge of Your Fertility, the definitive guide to natural birth control, pregnancy achievement, and reproductive health by Tony Weschler, I've heard is really good. I have it on my
Okay.
Goodreads list.
Okay,
But
okay.
you want to know what I think is crazy? If I was, how old was I in 2021? If I was a 19, 2021. No. If I was a 20-year-old girl and I found the answer to all of society's problems, like, I'm just saying I must be pretty smart, right? Because that's the first time I did acid.
Oh
Anyways.
my God. Yep, you're a really smart dude. Don't go off your birth control if you're on it, because you will get pregnant and die.
No, go off your birth control, queen. Just track your cycle. What you don't
You
know
can't
is
just
they're
track your
fucking
cycle.
no. Literally, literally the thing is that they're actually lying to you, and the truth is that if you just track your cycle, you will know when you are going to get when you could get pregnant.
Yeah, but it's
So
like
don't have him do it inside you,
it's not 100% is the thing. Can you ask for Josh?
dude. At this hour,
Well,
could our next episode be about the new internet?
yeah, but can we finish this episode? Like,
I just
um,
don't feel right anymore.
I'm gonna hang up on you.
Okay, Josh Ovalle. Josh Ovalle. Josh Ovalle. I love you. Please come on the podcast.
Josh, if you don't come on the podcast after this, well, we bet you'll come on the podcast in a couple of episodes when we have on the podcast. Eugene. Can you hear me?
This is going up after the Eugene episode, babe. Yeah, babe.
Ew. I hate when you call me babe.
Okay, guys.
I'm
Freaking
hanging up.
wish me luck on Thursday, though.
Wish me luck just living life.